Well, after months of work, Alberta has finally submitted its pitch for a new West Coast oil pipeline. The driving force behind this project joins us now, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Welcome to the show. Thank you for making time during Stampede, too. We know you're busy.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure.
The pipeline will, it appears now, largely use an existing route. You've got tens of billions of dollars of support from your own government, the federal government. Can you say with some real certainty now that this project is going to happen?
I think that it's looking increasingly likely, and that's part of the reason why we got a private proponent who came forward to partner with us in Pembina Pipeline. Using the incredible expertise of the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the knowledge that they had in building TMX, I think is also going to assist us in identifying some of the issues around routing and environmental issues, as well as Indigenous stakeholders and partnerships. And so what we realized, of course, since we've had such a difficult time in the last decade in getting these kinds of major projects built, that having a private partner at the table, I think, brings the capital discipline that we need in order to make sure that the project is built in a timely fashion with dollars and cents in mind, but also having both the provincial and federal governments at the table gives some certainty that we're going to work efficiently through the regulatory processes. So we're hoping for a conditional approval by October 1st with the final approval by September of 2027. And then we'll be in a position to know that when we'll be able to get shovels in the ground.
The original plan, in terms of the MOU in November with the federal government, was that a private sector company was going to build this. I mean, you talk about Pembina. That's about 10% right now of the project as we understand it, or at least that's what you're looking at. That would suggest that the remaining 90% of the money is going to be evenly divided between you and the federal government. I wonder, as a conservative premier, how do you explain to taxpayers why so many tens of billions of dollars should be put into a project when we've been repeatedly told that this is going to be so profitable?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. These projects are profitable. You can just see right now that the dividend that has been paid to the Canadian government last year was over $1 billion from TMX. And so when you think about these pipeline projects lasting up to 60 years, you can well imagine why it is that they're able to return such a large portion of their revenue and why it is that they're profitable. The second thing I say is most pipeline projects are 20% funded with equity and 80% with debt. And so a portion of the cost is, again, generated through the tolls, and then it goes to be paid by debt. So we'll have to see what the final outcome looks like about what ownership stake is taken by each of the partners, how much is going to be debt financed and paid off over time, and how much is going to be equity. And so that's what we'll be working out over the course of the next year. But what I would say is that the demonstration that these projects work is the fact that we have TMX already being profitable just 1 year into its commission.
Right. I mean, I will say billions of dollars, I believe it was $34 billion went into building it. So it's going to take decades. I know you're making the point that you expect it to continue to be profitable well beyond that. But I want to focus in still on the private company here, Pembina. When you read the news release that they've put out going along with this, they are interested in this 10% stake, but they make it clear there is a lot of caution around this. They're still evaluating the plan. Is it possible they could choose to walk away, that this could become entirely a public project?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I think that what we've been looking for and what private industry has been looking for is some indication that governments can work together to clear regulatory hurdles so projects can get built. You have to remember the environment we're walking into. We have an environment where the Northern Gateway project got all of its approvals and was canceled. And then we had the Keystone XL project that was approved and in construction, and then a presidential permit from the US was canceled. And then we had $1 billion spent on an Energy East regulatory process they pulled the plug on because they couldn't see the way through to the finish line. So you can well imagine why it is that pipeline proponents are a little bit nervous based on the past 10 years of history. And so when you have that kind of history, it takes commitment on both the federal and provincial government's part to de-risk these projects and make sure that that industry has some confidence that they can be built in a timely way. It's going to be the proof is going to be in what we go through over the next year. But I'm pleased that the Prime Minister seems willing to work with Alberta to make that happen.
You talk about uncertainty that can surround pipeline projects. In the case of Alberta, of course, there is this referendum on a referendum that's coming in October. Do you think Pembina will be more ready to commit, or other private sector partners, once that referendum is over?
Pembina is a great partner. We actually had a really major announcement previous in the day,
The
$4.6 billion
data centers, yeah.
fully private sector funded announcement, and that's going to be the gas to build a pipeline to get power generation for what will ultimately be at least a 900 megawatt data center and perhaps even 1,800 megawatts. And that to me is a demonstration that people feel confidence in the partnership that is being built across the country. We're at a moment in time in Canada that is very different than we were 18 months ago, where a lot of Albertans had lost hope, and for good reason. We'd been targeted by aggressive policy led by Justin Trudeau, Stephen Guilbeault, and at the time the leader of the NDP, to keep our resources in the ground. Even saw Avi Lewis from the NDP saying that the NDP stand firmly against this type of project. That's the kind of thing that has created the division in the country, and I'm glad to see that the federal Liberals are moving beyond that. They're taking the same approach that the federal Conservatives are, and I think that should give people confidence. And that's what we're trying to do by having these agreements.
I want to go back to what I asked you, though, a moment ago. I take your point that Pembina is also involved in this AI data center, but the difference is that the pipeline crosses provincial boundaries, right, into what could, if this referendum went to sort of the nth degree, be another country if Alberta did choose to separate. So I'm asking you, do you think there will be more private sector enthusiasm for this project if Albertans choose to remain in October?
Well, I'm doing whatever I can to give some confidence to Albertans who are disaffected, who are angry, who are hurt by how we've been treated over the last 10 years, that we can have a new approach with the federal government. And I know that the Prime Minister is doing his part to meet us part way. And that's the best that you can do in Confederation. You sometimes end up having differences of opinion, but as long as you're able to work them out, I think that that's the way a country is supposed to work. We weren't able to work them out in the previous 10 years. And I think that the more that we identify these issues and work through them, the more confidence Albertans will have.
You talk about Confederation. You well know BC Premier David Eby has been very critical of this plan all along. He's called it fictional. He's accused you of wedge politics. He told us yesterday he still doesn't like this project, even though he's not going to fight it. BC will be getting a cut of the revenue from this pipeline should it go ahead. What would qualify as fair compensation for British Columbia?
I think we'd have to look at what the arrangement was with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. My understanding is that they get paid almost like a toll on the amount of the product that is going through the pipeline. I would imagine it would be something very similar. But we've got other projects that we can work on with British Columbia. Major intertie projects have also been announced between Saskatchewan and Alberta, as well as BC and Alberta. We're supportive of all of the LNG projects that are going to be developed, including Silisms, which will have 60% of the gas coming from Alberta. So I think that for me, I tend to look at the things that we can agree on and work in partnership together on. And I'm glad that we have a few of those things that we can do that on.
I want to ask you about another political voice in this country. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said yesterday that the southern route will not allow for Canada to diversify its trading partners necessarily in the same way. Let's listen to more of what he had to say.
I think the North Coast ban is ridiculous. We believe that the best place to put a pipeline is to Prince Rupert or Kitimat, which can take 1 million barrels mostly to Asia. We don't want a pipeline that will simply lead tankers to take the oil south down to the California west coast. We're trying to diversify here.
Is he right to say that this is not the right route?
I think that was the original thought with Trans Mountain, that most of that product would end up going to the United States. And in fact, it hasn't turned out that way. Most of the product is going to Asian markets because it's about 14 days. So it's still about 10 days faster than oil coming from the U.S. Gulf Coast. He's quite right that going to Prince Rupert would cut even a few more days off of that. But I must say, when we look at a project, we want 1 million more barrels going to Asian markets. We know that this is where this oil will be destined for. And we want to make sure that we can get it to market in a cost-effective and efficient way. And if we can get 2 to 3 years shaved off that process by going along an existing route, that just seems to make good sense. When we looked at the proposals, it would have cost about the same amount of money going north as going south. And I think there will still be opportunities for us to partner with the nations in Prince Rupert. We've got AltaGas, which is already doubling its propane capacity. And I think that there's be lots more opportunity for us to continue looking at different export opportunities that work for Prince Rupert, but we think that this is going to result in a huge new amount of oil going to Asian markets.
Given now that this existing route is in play, I just wonder what that means for the timeline of the project. We've just got a moment left, but your best guess right now for when this pipeline could be in operation.
Well, what I can tell you is we've got October 1st is the conditional approval. September 2027 is when we'd be looking at final approval, and the construction could start very quickly after that. I think what will happen is that we'll now have to do a reach out to our Asian partners, whether it's Japan or Indonesia or Malaysia or South Korea, all of whom have expressed interest, and talk with them about how quickly they would like to get this product to market. And then on top of that, talk with our energy producers to see how quickly they can ramp up. We've already begun those conversations because Pathways, the Oil Sands Alliance project for carbon sequestration, is part and parcel of this. And those are the same companies we'll be relying on to expand their production. So those conversations will be taking place over the next year. And as soon as they're ready to go, I think that you'll see that the pipeline construction can proceed as quickly as possible to make sure that we take advantage of that market opportunity.
Okay. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, thank you for making time today. Appreciate it, Premier.
You bet. Thank you.
It's time now for the Power Panel. Jonathan Kalas was a Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Amanda Galbraith was an advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And in a moment, we are going to speak to Rob Russo, correspondent for The Economist. We are just connecting the Rob Russo pipeline right now. But Amanda, I will start with you. What do you make of the fact that it looks like it's going to be 90% funded by public money? Did that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me because I think over the successive decade, the federal government has created an environment where the private sector is reluctant to come in, right? I mean, Premier Smith has listed out, the projects that were approved, have been canceled, started, didn't complete. So I think naturally the private sector is risk averse. I think it's an excellent thing to see Pembina come to the table to say we want to be a part of this. I think that's a good sign. I think, as the Prime Minister said, they have to create an environment where the private sector feels comfortable weighing in, putting, billions of dollars, some of which in previous projects have gone to waste, towards these initiatives. So sometimes the government's got to lead because over the successive years, and candidly, most of that's under the Liberal government, we created an economic environment that did not support this kind of investment.
Rob Russo, Canada correspondent for The Economist, who we've connected to now. Amanda says, she's not surprised that there's public money put into this. And in a way, that was, I think, what we heard in the interviews with Premier Smith and Minister Hodgson. But then my question is, well, why in November did the MOU say, well, this is primarily going to be, or this is going to be a private project? And the Prime Minister said the same things publicly at the time. No private proponent, no project. I mean, I don't think we understood that it was the public-private partnership. I'm really testing the alliteration out here, folks. The public-private partnership that the Premier prognosticated on yesterday.
I've never seen the minister, Tim Hodgson, do the funky chicken, but that's as close as he came under questioning, your persistent questioning about the change on public funding. Look, Mr. Hodgson, the government, they're juggling jigsaws right now that are threats to our prosperity, to our national unity. And among them is the fact that Alberta is going to hold a referendum on independence, not on independence necessarily, but on that could lead to a referendum on independence in October. That is a threat to our prosperity and to our national integrity. The world has changed. I think that would have been the simplest answer that Mr. Hodgson could have given, because it's the truth. The world has changed. The energy transition isn't happening as quickly as anybody thought it was going to happen a few years ago. We have a threat to the south. We have increased demand for Canadian energy. So like the jigsaw that's biggest and loudest and closest to the government right now is a referendum in October. And they needed to do something to show that this was not just going to be a choice between the status quo and having a vote on separating. I think what this did is change the calculus, the equation of the referendum in a way. It's no longer just the status quo. Is it going to be enough for the frustrated federalists, who represent up to a quarter of the people who want to remain in Canada but would like to see the federal government do more to, in some ways, use the threat of a referendum to force the government to do more? We'll see. I think it's an important first step, though. It's no longer the status quo versus more pressure on the government through a referendum.
Jonathan, I wonder if you can sort of lift the veil for us a little bit in terms of like the advice or the strategy that's going on here, that we're not seeing either the federal government or the Alberta government talk about figures that they're asking taxpayers to invest. I mean, it's very clear in the Alberta proposal what the estimate is here, right? $35 to $43 billion. If I'm terrified to be doing math on live television here, but if 10% of this is Pembina, the remaining 90% are those two governments. You split it in half. It doesn't seem like the figures are all. But I truly don't know. I don't know if there are other factors at play. I would love to know. The folks who might have those answers aren't forthcoming with them yet. What's going on?
Well, I think actually it was one of the things that Minister Hodgson did kind of give you in the interview was he said, yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. So he sort of accepted your numbers as a ballpark. And I think that's fair. I don't know that they know the exact numbers today. And if they're going to go through this process, it'll take 14 months. And by September next year, they hope to have a project approved and shovels go in the ground. I think the numbers can change. I'm sure they will. And governments hate, both the provincial one, the federal one, all of them, hate giving you a number and then it can change. They hate promising that it'll be all private and then it becomes a mix or it's mostly public. So committing to something it's not early, but at this stage seems probably premature. I also think that this may be kind of the opposite of the original Trans Mountain, which was a private investment that needed to be bailed out by the government. I think the government is hoping that the stability that they'll create in this environment where they are willing to fund a big chunk of it, there will be additional investors that are interested in coming in once they see this is serious, this is real, and moving forward. So I think those numbers, both the percentages, who's investing what, and outside investors, I think those can change over the next year and a little bit.
Amanda, I'm interested in where this leaves Pierre Poilievre, who is, of course, in, like virtually every politician in Canada, he's in Calgary right now for Stampede. And, you know, given what is happening with this vote on a referendum and the prospect of having a referendum, it's interesting and I think significant to see all these politicians in Alberta at this moment. But where does this leave Pierre Poilievre? Before the actual announcement yesterday, he was saying, well, Northern route is better. We have Premier Smith saying, listen, Southern route makes a heck of a lot of sense. This is going to work really well for us. What then is he left to say about this project?
I mean, I think there's going to be lots of political conversation about the project. I mean, you're talking about the use of public tax dollars and how the government's characterize it. I think they can speak about the fact that the tanker ban remains, even though, you know, other countries are allowed to use those waters differently. The fact that they have not, in fact, repealed a lot of the kind of the anti-pipeline or anti-industrial carbon tax. Other places, they have not done that. So I think Pierre Poilievre has those roots. But what I would say is that I think there is a space for the Conservatives and Conservatives writ large in this country to campaign for Canada, for Pierre Poilievre to stand up and say part of this is Alberta wants in. This is a critical infrastructure project. We need to build this bigger, faster, better. And I think kind of use that as a way to champion Canada. So I think they can continue to kind of, I think, poke holes in some of the legislative solutions they haven't found, and also I think maybe embrace the country in a more positive message.
I'm curious, one of the things you listed there, though, you said, well, he can criticize the use of public tax dollars. And I genuinely wonder, can he, when Danielle Smith is out there making the case for the use of them? Or like, I mean, I know he can, but does that undercut his argument?
I mean, I don't think they want to run sideways with Premier Smith. And if you look at some of the messaging that's come out, they've certainly acknowledged her role in working with the federal government to bring this forward, right? Like, they don't want to be at each other. And I think that's been very clear as they've communicated on each other's comments. But what I think he can say is the government would not have to be doing this if there was an environment where the private sector felt confident investing, right? Is the point that was just made. The government now needs to step in and say, this is a stable investment environment for you to step in. And I do believe, I agree with the idea that we will see larger partnerships from other folks. Perhaps, you know, we see a bigger piece of the pipeline stake come from the private sector. But I think the Prime Minister had the idea that we'll create this major projects, we'll create a public environment that says, hey, come and invest, we're open for business. The private sector doesn't believe them at this point, or broadly. So I think that is where the proof has to be going forward. And Pierre Poilievre can rightly say this is because of a decade of Liberal government that this is why we're in this place.
Rob, I wonder about Mark Carney. I mean, one of the things Stephen Guilbeault said in that interview is essentially this doesn't sound like the guy who wrote values. Can we say that that all comes down to the events of the last 6 months, you know, global factors, things like CUSMA and the Strait of Hormuz, or is there something else going on here?
No, I think that there's a national unity imperative. I thought Mr. Hodgson said that repeatedly. Absolutely true. It's almost the inverse of Mr. Poilievre's situation. Mr. Poilievre shouldn't be a sore winner. He should take the win. The fact is, Mark Carney is now saying things that the Conservatives have been saying for 15 years. If the world needs more energy, and it does, it should be a Canadian energy. I remember Conservatives saying that 15 years ago. That should be chalk up a win if you're Pierre Poilievre. We're not meeting our targets, Mark Carney said. Well, who said that for years and years and years? Conservatives have said that as well. Chalk up a win. Take the win, take the wins, and move on if you're Pierre Poilievre. It is astonishing to recognize how far the Liberal Party has come, but Mark Carney has come as well. I don't think former Minister Guilbeault is wrong at all. Mark Carney has moved substantially, but I think it is fair to say that the world has changed substantially since then. It's not just the Straits of Hormuz. It is an enduring phenomenon that the world is going to be using oil for a lot longer than a lot of people had anticipated. And it is absolutely true that our situation with the United States has changed. And if we're trying to negotiate a deal with them, having other customers beyond the United States is a very good thing. I can remember a former Treasury Secretary of the United States saying here in Ottawa a few years ago that if he were still in the administration of the government at the time, advising the White House, he would not want that energy to be going to China. That's where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. I heard the U.S. ambassador say that again this morning, express a little bit of alarm about the fact that it might be going to China. Well, again, we have cards. We do have cards, and we are in the middle of very difficult negotiations with not a whimsical, but a guy who is the Prince of Pandemonium, Donald Trump. We might be able to bring him to heel with some things like this.
Jonathan, I'm wondering, we've talked about this sort of from a federal perspective, but I want to lean in on your Quebec advisor roots. I mean, Stephen Guilbeault was, as he pointed out, Mark Carney's Quebec lieutenant. He is still a prominent voice in the province of Quebec. Is it a problem, A, to be putting more federal funds into a pipeline, even if the government is arguing that ultimately it's going to be profitable, and B, to have Guilbeault out there criticizing it? Does Mark Carney have perhaps a Quebec problem in all of this?
Right now, we can talk about political capital. Mark Carney has it. Now, it's a finite amount. Can't tell you exactly how much, but he has the political capital to make these kinds of decisions. And to the list that Rob had of who has changed and what has changed, the world and Canada-US relations, I think Canadian voters have changed. And that's true in Quebec as well. You've seen polls that people are actually open to drilling, to pipelines, to even looking into the St. Lawrence or other areas where there may be natural resources, oil and gas in Quebec. Those are things you would never have imagined. Now, I don't think we're going to go that far, but it just means that the mindset has changed, and Mark Carney's capitalizing on the current situation, the uncertainty, and the idea that Canada has to be more, when we say independent, it has to rely on itself and being able to extract its natural resources and not be trapped into only selling it to the US. Mm-hmm. You can say that China makes this a challenging option, but there was a list of other countries. Danielle Smith listed Malaysia,
Korea,
Indonesia,
Japan, India, for sure.
They're all looking for additional resources. And so it's pretty open-minded. I know that was definitely a discussion when the PM went to India. So there are a lot of options out there. I think that the world is changing. We're trying to capitalize on it. And voters, where we ranked the environment 10 years ago, it's not where we rank it right now.